Perfect. Now we have another live guest on the show. Peter McGarry, a Limerick man, has been researching the history of Shannon Airport crashes for a series of documentaries, which you can watch on YouTube. He is now an author of the book Falling Stars, which is the complete history of Shannon Airport crashes from 1946 to 1961. He joins us now on the line to talk more on this very fascinating discussion, and I'm looking forward to it. Peter, a very good morning to you. It's your first time, if I'm right in saying, on Scariff Community Radio. We're delighted to have you here. Tell us, first of all, during the week you had a lecture at the Clare Museum. You were talking about the Alitalia 618 crash back in 1960. Can you tell us about your talk at the Clare Museum and focus in on Alitalia 618 itself?
Sure. Good morning to you and good morning to all your listeners. I hope it's dry where you are. The talk was on Wednesday evening. That's at the Clare Museum, and they wanted me to focus specifically on one of the 6 crashes that is covered in my book Falling Stars, which is readily available. This was an Italian airliner, Alitalia flight AZ618, which was a 2-year-old airplane. Left Naples, moved to Rome. It's about a 40-minute flight. Refueled at Rome, took on its passengers, 52 passengers and crew. Flew to Shannon. All aircraft back in those days had to refuel in Shannon because they simply didn't have the range. It was a 2-year-old DC-7C, very capable machine, flown by I won't say very experienced pilot, a massively experienced pilot, formerly of the Regia Aeronautica, which is the Italian Air Force, a guy called Captain Luigi Gentile. I've been tracing his family roots. Very, very interesting. The airplane was underground 40 minutes in Shannon, refueled 7,000 gallons of avgas, which is the same as petrol, was pumped into its wings, and it took off on the shortest flight of Alitalia airline history. The flight lasted 30 seconds. Wow. It's totally implausible part of this is that it gained no more than 200 feet altitude, went into a left-hand turn, and the part, if you were selling the idea to a Hollywood film producer, they would throw the script out the window. It crashed into a graveyard.
Genie. Okay.
So when you think of the probability.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there, it was only a 2-year-old aircraft. So, I mean, you wouldn't expect things to happen like this with a very new aircraft.
No, there was no distress call. There was a very large crew on board. It was a crew of 12. Of the 52 on board, 12 of them were crew. And one of those crew members was what's known in the business as a check pilot, which is any airline's way of ensuring quality control. So all very strange. The Alitalia crash has one thing in common with the other 5 crashes at Shannon. They all took place at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, that's whether the aircraft were approaching or leaving Shannon. So it has this kind of a spooky witching hour thing about it, all at 3 o'clock. Now, I've spoken to an airline pilot friend of mine who tells me about a thing called circadian rhythm, which is your sense of day-night, which is 3 o'clock in the morning is not a good time for a lot of people.
No. No. So, like, yeah, I mean, I'm just curious, like, do we know actually why this accident happened?
The aircraft we know that it went into a left-hand turn, and as any listeners out there who've ever sat behind the control of an aircraft know, the minute you pull a turn, it's the inner wing starts to lose lift, so you have to pull back on the stick. But no explanation. They should have been far higher at that stage. They left on runway 05, so they were tracking northeast, so they would have turned out over the Atlantic on a route that would take them to Gander. But it was I was well into the project, and I was working away when I got a message from a guy called Jerry McMahon. Jerry is from Ennis originally, was working in Shannon for years before moving to Dublin. He was in the electronic engineering business, and he said to me, you know something, I could show you some newspapers from the day. And Sure enough, true to his word, he sent on newspapers, and it was at that point that the entire project, not just the Alitalia crash, the TWA, the Pan Am crash, the KLM crash, President Airlines, they all took on a very, very different complexion. I was originally looking at it from a forensic aspect as to what went on. And it's when you start looking at the background of people and the stories, it becomes very real. And even though it's a long time ago, incredibly sad, very, very tragic. Just to give you one example of that Alitalia crash,
Yeah.
there was a mother and, sorry, I should say a stepmother and two little boys on the airplane. And this is replicated right across the passenger list. They were from the Bronx in New York, and the two boys were Frank and John Jr. Lisi. John Lisi Sr. was from Sicily, running a grocery business in the Bronx. His wife died. He went back to Sicily on holidays, met a girl, and married her. And what he did was he let the two boys spend some time with the stepmom in Sicily while he was doing up a new house in the Bronx. So they were traveling back, and they got caught up in the crash. And one of the two boys, the elder lad, a 5-year-old fellow, was killed. And we have accounts from a nurse called Irene O'D walking through the carnage in the field that night, and a little boy looking for his brother. So we know it's them. In fact, I met the relatives of Irene O'D on Wednesday night. It was very, very interesting. But that story of families being torn asunder is all over that incident. But the funny thing is with the Shannon Air crashes, as I said, there were a total of 6, and they're all documented in my book. The minute you mention Shannon Air crashes, most people will gravitate towards the 1954 crash, which was a Dutch crash called the Triton, which went into the river. People didn't the airport didn't realize. KLM, exactly. It went into the river, and I said to a colleague of mine who was featured in some of the documentaries that if there ever was a Hollywood film waiting to be done, it's that one, because it's not just the entire incident, it's all of the stories that come to play. And sure enough, about 3 weeks ago, the actor John Travolta, through his company Constellation Productions, has bought a Lockheed Constellation from a place in Kansas. And the reports I'm reading are that he's bought this with the intention of making a feature film, which obviously has a Constellation as its central part. And I said to Vincent, "Do you know what? I would bet that the film that's going to be made is of the 1954 Triton story in Shannon." And just on that alone, in September, it was the 70th anniversary of that crash. And I said to Vincent, "You know what we should do is, even though we had other documentaries put together, and obviously it's my book that's out there, I said, do you know what we'll do? We'll film a 10-minute piece commemorating the 70th anniversary." Filmed it in due course and popped it up on my YouTube. Very, very surprised to see it has been viewed 35,000 times. So we weren't expecting that, but the level of interest in the book has been colossal. I thought it would be a little book, but it's gone on to sell thousands. You can get it at Ennis bookshop, Easons in Shannon, Easons in the Parkway, and it's available as well from PILOT.IE.
PILOT.IE, okay. Can I just ask, just going back to the KLM Triton, I remember actually last night I watched some of your videos on this particular flight, which can be found on your YouTube channel. You can tell us a little bit more about that in a minute.
Sure.
But many people died on this flight, and it was referenced that people were trapped in their seats because and they were inhaling toxic fumes from aviation fuel. And what was interesting about this crash is that, yes, you were right in saying that it did land in the estuary, but it crashed literally only 1.5 miles from the airport. That's quite a short distance away, isn't it?
Yeah, you can see why the Hollywood film is starting to add up, because you know that expression, truth is stranger than fiction, it really, really applies here. And you had some bizarre episodes there. there was an Irish-American guy that was boarding at Shannon. There was a couple of people boarded at Shannon. He was flying first class. The first class in a Lockheed Constellation, believe it or not, is at the back. And the reason it's at the back is because it was quieter with those big propeller blades swinging around. So there was almost a fist fight in the departure lounge because the KLM check-in people were saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, the first class is full," and he was shouting and screaming and roaring. And eventually, a KLM first class passenger came up to him and said, "Look, you know what? Out of national pride, I'm in first class, but you take my seat." The Irish-American guy took his seat in first class, and he died that night because the back of the aircraft submerged into the river, as well as that was where most of the petrol fumes are starting to build up. So kind of strange. And then there's this story then of two doctors, a doctor of medicine and a doctor of electrical engineering, hanging out the back of the tail to escape the fumes. And one of them died. The tide got to one before the rescue could come. But there's a whole backstory to that. There's strange things going on in Shannon that night, and it came out in the investigation. The pilot was being flown by the most experienced pilot in KLM, a guy called Adrian Verrier. He was within 2 or 3 months of retiring, and this thing happened. He had 9,000 hours built up, and it was almost, it had the feel of a Shakespearean drama to it, that somebody that senior could have such a terrible thing happen within almost at the finish line of this career. And that man was a published author himself, married to a Dutch actress. He was on his fourth marriage, and he must have been good with the ladies because he wasn't a particularly good-looking guy, but obviously he had a silver tongue.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to mention there that while I think of it, we know even to this day that it takes a skill in itself to land a plane on water. Mm-hmm. We think of the Miracle on the Hudson back in 2011. Yeah. Like that was no wonder it's called the Miracle on the Hudson, because that was a once in a lifetime success. Like, so you can see why that, unfortunately, that many people in this circumstance, in this particular flight, died when landing on the water.
Yeah, there was 56 on board, and exactly half of them died. There's a kind of slightly funny aspect to it. There was a female journalist from New York on board, and her name will come to me in a minute now. And after the crash, as the cabin was building up petrol fumes, they were in the forward cabin. They weren't drowning victims. There was a guy next to her, took out a packet of cigarettes from his suit pocket, and you can see this happening. And he was just about to light the cigarette. She punched him in the jaw. No, she later apologized for it. She punched him in the jaw and knocked the cigarette and the lighter out of his mouth, because had that happened, the whole thing would have gone up in the middle of the river.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Her name was Snyder. Snyder was her name. Yeah.
So Jim O'Brien here, presenting with Daragh.
Hello.
I come from Kildimo in County Limerick, and we were right across the river from Shannon Airport.
Yes.
And the planes used to fly in over our houses coming into land. And it used to be a training centre. There were training planes flying around all the time. But there was one of the stories I remember being told at home, that in one of the crashes, that they didn't realise that the control tower, the plane had crashed, and that the pilot walked back along the mud and knocked the door of the control tower and said, "Listen, I'm just after crashing."
That is, you're absolutely correct. It wasn't a pilot; it was actually a navigator, and his name was Johan Tiemann. Of the crew, 3 of them died. There was 2 males and a female. The female, which makes it very, very poignant, the female was a Dutch Jewish girl whose entire family had been wiped out in the Holocaust in a work camp. So she, Helga Lowenstein was her name, good Jewish name. And Helga is buried in the Netherlands, and she has been known for all that time since within aviation circles as the Angel of the Shannon. Just one last thing, if I might. You mentioned that you were from Kildimo, so you're not too far from Palace Kenry, okay?
That's
Uh,
right. It's the
yeah,
parish.
and obviously you know the piers. The pier looks directly across.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
There was a consignment of
With the landscape.
there was a consignment of diamonds on board the aircraft. It was £350,000 in 1954 money, which we did a calculation on it. I think 15 million in today's money. Don't know, we could never find out who the owner of it was. The airplane was part salvaged in the middle of the river. The nose section broke off in a storm 2 days after, and the nose section was towed to the airport for forensic examination because there was a hearing in Dublin. The rear section of the aircraft was floated by a Dutch salvage team and pulled to Ringmoylan Pier. When they were at Ringmoylan Pier, there was one last body at the back of the aircraft. The hold where the diamonds were being stored was in the belly of the aircraft, and once they got it up on the mud shoals, they were able to get the door open and they got the diamonds. But that's as far as the story goes. I don't know whose diamonds they were.
And what flight was that where you said the navigator walked up along the mud?
This is the 1954 flight that we're referring to.
The 1954 flight. That was the one. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. When we were doing the research on the book, when I was doing the research on the book, I kept rubbing my eyes with the track record of KLM in the 1950s, coming from the late 40s into the 50s. They had a staggering amount of air disasters. A lot of them were with the Constellation, but they had other aircraft as well. When the book came out, there was only 5 crashes covered in it. I started getting an awful lot of emails from people in Galway to say, look, would you cover the 1958 crash of the Hugo de Groot? Now, the locals in Galway refer that as to the Galway Bay crash. So I did append an extra chapter into the book covering the Hugo de Groot, and that is in the current edition of the book. And the Hugo de Groot, if you add the Hugo de Groot and all of the crashes that took place in Shannon, you're talking about the deaths of just over 350 people. So it is significant. It really is, yeah.
What's the name of the book again, Peter?
The name of the book is Falling Stars, and it can be got at the Ennis bookshop, Easons in Shannon, Easons in the Parkway in Limerick. It can be got from PILOT.IE. A very good friend of mine called Jenny runs that outfit. Her husband is a pilot. Or by emailing me, and it's Peter McGarry 123@gmail.com. But I have sold thousands of this book. I'm now working on the follow-on, which is it's the yin and yang. It's the day and night. It's called Rising Stars, and it documents the good times of aviation in the same time frame as this. And for good measure, I'm also working on a novel called Apollo's Children, which is not set in a dystopian future. It's actually set in a dystopian past in Clare. So.
And can I just add, is Rising Stars, is it primarily focused on Shannon again, or is it just aviation in general in Ireland at the time?
It certainly has a Shannon focus, but the attention turns globally. But Shannon is well in there, as is Foynes, because what we've done is gone through the everything from about 1945 up to 1970 with the seaplanes,
of course, as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole history of it there. We had to include it. Very interesting stories, and we've put some really vintage photographs and advertising campaigns in that. So plenty to see there. The stories are superb.
Peter, so that'll be one final question before we let you go. And I'm just curious to know, like you've done research on the crashes at Shannon, but if we were to look at other airports during those particular decades that we mentioned, 1946 to 1961, did other airports in the country at the time experience crashes like the ones in Shannon?
There was one crash in Dublin, and it was an Aer Lingus crash. It was a DC-4, I think. Believe it or not, I was coming from Lourdes. It landed on a road. Everybody walked away from it. There was there was an Aer Lingus Viscount which had a training crew on board. I think it was 5 or 6 that went down, but Dublin overall had nothing like the experience of Shannon.
And is there any particular reason, do you think, for that?
Well, as I said, the crashes that I've documented in the Falling Stars book all happened in around 3 o'clock in the morning. So the only thing we can hang out of it is the timing of it. There's other crashes. The first crash was down to a 1946 TWA, the Star of Cairo. Very, very interesting incident, and extremely interesting crew and passengers on board that aircraft. That was a maintenance error that brought that down. We'd have a totally unique experience in April. We went to the old ground in Ennis to interview the daughter and the granddaughter of the 1948 crash, the Empress of the Skies. The captain was Captain Frank Jekyll. So we met his people, brought them out to the mass grave in Drumcliff Cemetery. We filmed this as well. It's all up on the YouTube. The interview is fantastic. And very sadly, the daughter, she died a couple of weeks ago. But the granddaughter is coming over. Lisa is coming over. She's staying with my wife and I in June because for the first time in about 50 years, there's a Pan American flight going to land in Shannon.
Yes, I heard that. Yeah, tell us more.
Yeah, it's being run by a very, very elite British travel group called Criterion Travel. And when Criterion Travel came across the type of work that we've been doing, and especially with the Rising Stars book, they established contact with us. So we expect to be filming around that a lot. There's actually 2 flights. And what they're doing with that, they're leaving from New York. It's a chartered Boeing 757, previously owned by Icelandair. I think they're still working with Icelandair. It'll be in Pan Am colours, and they're going from New York to the Azores, to Lisbon, and up to Marseille, to London, into Shannon. So it's a big thing for Clare. It's a big thing for the county because it really puts Clare once again on the global stage for tourism, and it's very, very expensive.
And when did you say that was taking place?
There's 2 flights. One of them is late June. I think the second one then is early July. The tickets for that flight, $59,000 each.
Oh my God!
I'll take 2. I'll take 2. Yeah, they're staying at Dromoland overnight.
Well, sorry, we won't be going on that flight anyway.
The checkbook out here.
I'm going. I'm sick to that the Ryanair.
I know. And Peter, that was look. Time has quickly crept up upon us again. I just want to thank you for joining us in the program.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Fascinating discussion. Many thanks. And look, this won't be the last time you'll be on this program. We'll have you again, no doubt, when the new book is available. So Peter McGarry, many thanks for joining us.
Not at all. It's my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, all the best. That was Peter McGarry there talking to us about aviation crashes at Shannon Airport from 1946 to 1961.